I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, over the weekend, many of us were mesmerized by the powerful jet that reached across the North Atlantic here. Wind speeds within this part of the jet stream, about 6 miles above our heads, was moving around 240 to 250 miles an hour. And as a result of that, we saw some pretty interesting footage. This here from News Flare. This video went viral over the weekend watching this aircraft land here in Birmingham, where its approach came in at a pretty interesting angle, kind of fighting against the wind as it went down here toward the runway. Thankfully, this flight was perfectly fine as it did eventually make the landing here, but must have been a bit of a hairy ride there for those pilots trying to get that plane oriented properly to hit this landing. So that strong jet stream, as it left the United States, well, it left this in its wake. We have throughout this week major flooding threat in through this area, not simply because over the last week we saw anywhere between 3 and 8 inches of rainfall, but because we're going to expect to see more precipitation in that corridor. Some locations right in through here could be right in through here very, very heavy, maybe adding another 4 to 6 inches of rain. So the flood fight is going to continue in this area. North of it, we did have a little swath right in through here, some pretty heavy snowfall that stretched back into the Dakotas and then moved into the interior parts of the Northeast. But outside of that, get to the west, well, the split flow really is avoiding California, as you can see here. And despite the little cutoff low that did sneak into Southern California over the weekend, not much precipitation for the rest of the state, as it's all come targeting in on the northwest side of this flow pattern here that split across the Pacific. But I do want you to watch this little cutoff low that did come through California, because it will be the main upper level feature that then ejects here into the south central plains midweek, and not only gives us severe weather threat right in through this area, but possibly some more snow north of a line right in through here. So let's get to some of those details here and try to understand what this pattern's doing. First, this is at least what snowfall we did get over the weekend. So you can see where that system did slide through. We were able to pick up from parts of Montana all the way over to Michigan here, a little band in there of 6+ inches of snowfall stretching from South Dakota through southern Minnesota and then eventually over to Wisconsin and Michigan. And that particular event we had kind of picked up on midweek last week, but it really, if you ask me, kind of outperformed itself over the weekend. Meanwhile, at the end of last week, down here in north of Atlanta, Georgia, some spots here getting into the Appalachian Mountains picked up several inches of snow on a weak little system that slid through. But I told you the snow was really in the interior here of the Northeast, leaving a lot of those folks along the East Coast kind of really missing out on winter. A lot of big wet snowflakes in through parts of the Midwest here, but this pattern, which has split around California's high pressure cell, has targeted the Cascades and the northern and central Rockies, really piling up the snow in those areas. We'll get to a snowfall forecast in just a moment. But I told you I'm quite concerned about the flood threat this week, and that's because this map shows you in the top 3 feet of our soil what we have in terms of moisture availability. When you get up here above 80 to 90% saturated, we're talking about easily giving us flood problems. About the only places that show up dry are to the west of this line here, parts of the Central Valley of California, and the rain shadow side here of the Cascade Mountains, due to the flow really just hitting those mountains almost in a perpendicular way for the last month and a half. But you can see that outside of just a few regions, our soil moisture anomalies are very high. I've showed this to you several different ways, but this water is water that has to drain as we get into spring, which is going to increase our spring flood threat. Meanwhile, if we just get a quick update on last Thursday's drought monitor, we can see that this map lines up quite well with the one I just showed you as to where things are quite dry. We'll keep an eye on these regions of drought to see if they expanded all this spring or if the weather patterns do continue to adjust such that we can help eliminate this drought going into our next growing season. But one thing is very clear, much of the Missouri, Mississippi, and Ohio river basins are completely drought-free, and as a consequence, the spring flood fight will be kind of exacerbated because of the excess of soil moisture. Let's now get into that rapid update. Over the next week, this will be a competition between high-pressure cells that move out of the Canadian prairies into the north central plains and a ridge that's sitting here down over Cuba. And what that does is that leaves a boundary right here through the midsection of the country that gets down into parts of the south central and southeast U.S. And on that, we could get some very, very heavy precipitation. Now, meanwhile, throughout much of this week, California is going to miss out on a lot of heavier precipitation as we still have the protective ridge in place. But what will happen is this little cutoff low sitting here will emerge midweek and take on off following that temperature boundary toward the north and east. And we do have the severe weather threat to the south of it, and we're going to be talking about some snow in through this corridor before all of this gathers in the northeast. But to zoom in and show you what some of those precipitation amounts look like, again, this is just through the end of this weekend. The operational European model is picking up on a swath right in through here, and it has been quite consistent on the placement of this, where we could be adding, remember this is adding to what we've already had, somewhere between 4 and maybe 6 inches of rainfall are possible in places in through here. I mean, notice the 1-inch boundaries are pretty far on either side of this too, so the flood fight in this part of the country is only going to be made worse this week. What about week 2? About the only changes of consequence are going to be happening over Alaska. We will be watching a deeper trough develop there. And in competition with this high pressure cell to the south, we're going to be getting some really strong and focused flow that comes right here into the Pacific Northwest. But with the subtropical jet stream still cutting underneath it, we can see a big section of the eastern half of North America still dealing with wetter than average conditions. And overall, this again takes us all the way to the 25th of February. That high pressure cell sitting in this area keeps California on the deficit side of their rain and snowfall as we progress through the end of this month. What about temperatures? Well, I want you to keep your eye on Alaska, but before you do that, I'll just let you know, behind this system emerging midweek, we will get some very cold air that temporarily, and I do mean temporarily, cuts through the midsection of the country behind this low pressure system. But with Alaska really showing us a trend over the weekend toward colder temperatures, this is going to relax the overall pattern across the rest of North America as we tuck the cold air away pretty far to the north. And what we had seen is some pretty cold air developing in the western United States. Well, look at what happens as we get out to days 10 through 15 as this pattern evolves. Much of the coldest air stays here. I'll show you what's going on with the polar vortex in a few moments, and this really relaxes the temperature patterns across much of the eastern half of the lower 48 and the Canadian prairies. So this seems to be the setup that we watch the models evolve with over the weekend. So one minor adjustment here, but we'll take a look at what those other teleconnections are saying in a few moments. All right, now let's get into some of the details. When looking at excessive rainfall today, the Hydrologic Prediction Center has issued a high risk from parts of Mississippi into Alabama and over to Tennessee today with this system that is emerging. And again, it's going to be one where there's a competition between two competing high pressure cells, one sitting over the southeast and another one initially sitting here over the north central plains. That's going to squeeze a boundary right in between the two here. So early this morning, that's where our heaviest rain was falling with snow in the interior of the northeast. And as we animate this forward, keep your eye on a couple of things. One, that boundary lingering in place here. Two, this cutoff low coming through the Baja of California. And three, you're going to see some light snow moving out of the northern Rockies into the high plains here as another system to the south of it begins to emerge. So we do have the risk for some freezing rain in parts of Texas getting into Oklahoma with the switch over to some snow on the back side of it. So right in through here late this afternoon and this evening, we're going to watch for some snow to accumulate as the heavy rain continues to push in through this corridor. Now after this upper level low sitting and spinning here over the Baja, getting over to Arizona and New Mexico, finally emerges into New Mexico and again spreads snow in this area. But watch what happens from this point forward. There's a system coming out of the Canadian prairies and a system emerging here in Texas and New Mexico. And what happens is they start to merge as I get into Tuesday evening and into Wednesday morning. So the system to the north introducing the colder air, the system to the south, so there's two waves. There's one here and there's one here, all right? The two waves are going to work together in the midsection of the country to form our next large low pressure system. As that all occurs, to the south of it, we do have the risk on Wednesday for another severe weather outbreak in the same region we saw the one a week ago. So this tells me this week with the merging of these two systems, great upper level support, great wind shear, and there's no shortage of Gulf moisture fueling these storms. So if you are inside that corridor, we have another rough midweek setting up here, and this will translate east as we move into the day on Thursday. So to see that, let's get over to the European model. We'll stop this right here, which is Wednesday afternoon. So this is the point where the system's coming out of the Canadian prairies. See it there? Very windy conditions in through here on Wednesday afternoon. And our new low is trying to emerge here, fed on the moisture return around this high, right into that area. So as we let this play forward, the cold air then smashes in from the north, and this is now Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Now at that point, it appears that the heaviest snow will sit right in through this area. I'll show you that snowfall map in a few moments. But here's the big heavy rain corridor and the potential for some severe weather here on Wednesday afternoon and evening, getting into the overnight hours in the lower Mississippi River Valley. There's enough warm air advection out ahead of this that it looks as though much of the Ohio Valley will start off on the rain side of things. But the colder air that comes in on the backside, well, you can see lingering here in parts of Wisconsin, Illinois, the northern halves of Indiana and Ohio into Michigan. This is where the snow will be sitting by the time we get to Thursday. Behind this, big high pressure cell moves in. So this means the end of this week is going to be very cold for this part of the country. But that high pressure cell isn't sticking around. Look how windy, by the way, things are on the back side of it. It will very quickly move on off to the east, and behind it we'll get a resurgence of warmer air. So it's just going to be a few days of colder air as everything kind of reloads back into the same pattern. As I take you into early next week, we just see, look, another system emerge that hits the same area. I'm just rocking back and forth between Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. Not this one, but next week, hitting that same corridor right in through here, as overall the flow didn't change too much as we get out into next week. So thinking about snow, what's the probability by the end of this week of getting 3 inches of snow or more? Well, as this next system emerges, remember it's going to put down the cold air first in New Mexico, Colorado, and parts of Texas. So then it slides just like this, and on the back side of it, right in through there. So watch out parts of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, northern Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. That could be the region that gets the best chance at picking up a few inches of snow out of this, maybe some locally heavier amounts. I need to see the model evolution really throughout the day today on Monday and early Tuesday to pin down some of the amounts here. But this is just, again, the probability. As we get into the parts of the Northeast, it's the interior, again, that gets the heavy snowfall. It's going to be the coastal regions that get the cold rain out of this. And certainly with that flow still doing something like this, you can see the northern Rockies, Cascades adding the snow, so are the central Rockies, but California, without having a switch in the direction of the winds in the Pacific, not seeing much change. What are temperatures doing? Well, let's take a look here. This is high temperature anomalies, so differences from normal. And on Monday, the coolest air compared to normal sitting right down here in parts of Texas, with the warmth stretching to the rest of the southern region into the Northeast. Well, playing this forward, let's pause it right here. This is Tuesday's departure from normal. This is now when the system is fully emerged here on Wednesday out of parts of New Mexico and Texas. And then as it races up, you can see the warmth here out ahead of that main frontal boundary. But then watch behind it. This is now Thursday's departure from normal, maybe up to 30 degrees cooler than average as that high pressure cell moves in. Warmth out east gets replaced by a cold shot of air behind this. So a few days of below average, well below average temperatures. But as I've been talking about, it's going to be temporary. You see, by Saturday into Sunday, we've already rebounded in this section of the country back over to well near average to above average temperatures. So these cold shots are temporary at best. So is anything changing? Well, we come back to the same idea. Looking at our teleconnections, 1, Arctic oscillation, still positive. Stratospheric polar vortex, still very strong, and it's moving right over this area over the next 10 days and looks just like a perfect donut. The North Atlantic oscillation, this has been the key to the warmth that has been experienced in the eastern half of North America. It has not let go of the trough just over or south of Greenland. And because the tropics aren't really adding much to this, with the MJO stuck in null phase or jumping out into phase 5 or 6, and the Southern Oscillation Index just hovering near zero as of late, we aren't getting a strong tropical signal at this point, given too that we don't have an El Nino or La Nina. So if anything has changed, it has been right here over Alaska. And we've noticed that over the weekend, the East Pacific Oscillation, which has been very problematic in forecasting this winter, is moving such that we're going back over into a trough in Alaska. And at the same time that's happening, the global winds, which have been quite strong, are returning back to average, which tells me I need to be watching what the winds are doing as they come off of Japan. That might influence the split in the jet stream over California. But as it stands, this is going to fire the jet stream right in through here, but overall not digging a deep trough around the rest of the United States, hence the return toward more moderate temperatures. And that's again what I'm showing you here. Day 5 through 10 on the left, day 10 through 15 on the right. California, keep a close eye on the split flow out west. I'll watch it for you to see if there's any change toward the end of the month, but it does appear that Alaska's got its firm grip on that colder air, and that's going to dominate the pattern across the lower 48. So we come back to this. I showed it last week. This is the long-range update for February 20th through March 20th. And overall, the models are really sticking with persistence in the pattern. Got precip anomalies on the left and temperature anomalies on the right. I'm showing you this because I want you to watch the trend in this forecast once I show it to you again midweek this week as we get some new updates. So again, we're just looking at this as a potential for our pattern for the remainder of winter and the start of spring. And we're just going to get a quick update on it at the middle of this week. Okay, so just keep this in the back of your mind. So as we take a look internationally, I want to show you something that was really interesting that happened over the weekend. This is a snow squall, some lake effect snow, but coming off of a pretty large body of water here. You're in Turkey watching this snow squall advance here toward the eastern edge of the Black Sea. And this is a good thing to kind of reiterate here. Remember, we talked about how we thought that parts of the Russian wheat belt and parts of Ukraine could have gone into this cold snap without much snow cover. Well, what we did see here is, again, this is the Black Sea sitting in right in through here, and this, of course, is the Caspian Sea. So the wheat belt kind of stretches right in between the two, going over into Ukraine and then Kazakhstan. So what we noticed here is that the snow boundary sat right in through there and down here as well. So a very narrow corridor where we have a lot of wheat did not get the snow cover before these cold temperatures settled in. And you can see the effect of that snow cover, keeping it much colder here, and then of course much colder down into this area. But right where it missed, we did get temperatures that got down to around 10, 11 degrees Fahrenheit early this morning. I don't think we're going to hear much news out of this, but I wanted to complete that story for us. Elsewhere around the world, let's just do a quick checkup on what's going on in South America. If you remember last week, I said I don't really trust any of the model forecasts beyond about 7 to 10 days, and this is why. We saw a pretty good trend over the weekend, suggesting now that the next 7 to 10 days is going to be much more favorable for harvest here in Mato Grosso. They're still 7% behind last year's planting pace for the safrinha crop, but the drier week ahead may help push things along. Now remember, it's still going to rain in this area, but not in excess of rainfall. That excess is really tucked away in parts of eastern Brazil and in parts of Argentina, which are anticipating another wet week. But last thing I want to point out to you is Paraná, which is right down in through here where I put that X. They're about 25% behind last year's corn planting pace for their safrinha corn. So I think we need to keep a close eye on that region despite the drier conditions that are happening there now. Okay, so with that kind of global update, we'll wrap it up. I hope you all have a great week and look forward to giving you updates all week long. And we'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.